On the night the storm tried to swallow the whole city, I crawled into twisted metal and dragged a man out of a crushed car with my bare hands. His name was Damien Liu, the youngest tech mogul on the coast, the kind of man whose company logos glowed on billboards like constellations, the kind of man who wasn't supposed to bleed, let alone die on a rain-slick road. I saved him anyway, and then my stepsister, Selina Sue, stepped neatly into the aftermath and claimed the hero's crown like it had always belonged on her head. In my last life, I fought to prove the truth. I held up my shredded gloves. I showed them the scar on my arm. I begged for one person to look at me and see what I'd done. Damien didn't. He married me anyway, not because he believed me, but because his family believed a savior was the charm that would keep death away. 6 months later, I was accidentally swept off a yacht and drowned under a black, indifferent sea. The last thing I heard before water filled my throat was Damien's voice, cold as the ocean floor. "A thief can wear stolen things for a lifetime," he said. "They still won't be hers." Then darkness. Now I was alive again. And the moment the Liu family came knocking, the drizzle outside the window carried the same smell of wet asphalt and lightning that haunted my bones. Our apartment looked even smaller in daylight. A decade of cheap furniture and fading wallpaper couldn't hide itself behind polite smiles. My stepmother, Madame Wen Fang, moved like panic in a human form, yanking cushions straight, wiping an already clean coffee table, hissing at me without turning her head. "Iris, put your design drafts away. Don't let them clutter the room." I stood where the balcony shadow spilled into the living room like ink. My fingers drifted, almost unconsciously, to the long raised scar along my forearm, a thin line of proof, a line nobody ever asked about. The bell rang. Madame Wen Fang practically launched herself to the door. Her expression changed mid-step, flustered eagerness sliding into a practiced, radiant warmth. "Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Liu, please come in." What an honour. They entered like they belonged to a different world. Mr. Liu's suit looked like it had never met dust. Mrs. Liu wore pearls that didn't feel like jewellery, so much as power made visible. Behind them, an assistant carried gift boxes wrapped so elegantly they almost seemed too expensive to breathe near our worn-out sofa. And Selina, my dear stepsister, had dressed for the part she'd been waiting to play since the storm. White dress, soft makeup, heels not high enough to look greedy, just high enough to look refined. She stood closest to Mrs. Liu, chin dipped, eyes bright with the exact balance of shyness and anticipation. A saint, a saviour, a lie. Madame Wen Fang and my father, Su Jian, guided the Liu couple to the best seats, as if our furniture could become noble by association. Selina hurried to pour tea, with the grace of someone trained for a stage. Mrs. Liu gently caught Selina's hand before she could retreat. Her gaze warmed, grateful and searching. "Good child," she murmured. "Let us look at you." Mr. Liu nodded, his voice steady, the kind that closed boardroom deals and ended arguments. "If you hadn't pulled Damien out that night," he said, "the consequences would have been unimaginable." Selina lowered her head, cheeks flushing on cue. "Uncle, Auntie, please don't say that," she whispered. "Anyone would have helped. I couldn't stand there and do nothing." Behind the softness of her voice, I saw it clearly, the same performance I had watched in my last life. Even better now, maybe because she knew the script by heart. Madame Wen Fang clasped her hands dramatically, as though she'd been the one with blood under her nails. "You have no idea how frightened she was," she said, her tone swelling with motherly devotion she'd never once spent on me. Thunder, lightning, rain so heavy you couldn't see a metre ahead. The car was destroyed. My poor daughter had nightmares for days. My father nodded as if repeating a line he'd been paid to memorize. "Selina has always been kind," he said. "Soft-hearted. She can't bear to see anyone suffer. I almost laughed, soft-hearted. That night, Selina had stood under an umbrella a safe distance away, trembling so hard her teeth clicked, crying out, "Sister, it's too scary. Call the police, wait for them," while I clawed at a jagged door with bare hands until glass carved my skin and rain mixed with someone else's blood on my face. The assistant opened a velvet box and slid a document across the table. Mr. Liu turned it towards Selina. 3% equity in Liu Group, he said, as if gifting a pen. A small token of gratitude. 3%, a fortune, handed over like a polite gesture. Selina covered her mouth, eyes wide in the exact shape of modest refusal. "No, I can't accept this. I didn't save him for money." Mrs. Liu's smile was gentle, but it didn't ask. It instructed, "Take it." Then she produced a second box, smaller, heavier with meaning, and opened it. A diamond ring lay inside, brilliant and cold, its custom cut catching the dim living room light like a blade. "This belonged to Damien's grandmother," Mrs. Liu said softly. "It was meant for our granddaughter-in-law." Selina's breath hitched at the perfect moment. "We consulted a master," Mrs. Liu added, lowering her voice as if fate itself required confidentiality. "Damien has escaped the worst of his calamity, but misfortune lingers. The master said he must marry his saviour. Joy must counter the remnants of darkness. Only then will his path be smooth." I watched Selina's expression shift in slow, beautiful waves. Surprise, fear, shy acceptance, as though destiny had just chosen her personally. Madame Wenfang and my father looked like they might float off the couch. Mrs. Liu took Selina's hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did, in my last life. That ring had fit me too. I wore it for half a year, until the sea tore it away along with my life. Selina finally noticed me, half hidden in the balcony shadow. She lifted her hand so the diamond could glitter at me like an insult dressed as light. "Look, Iris," she said sweetly, pride barely restrained. "Isn't it beautiful?" Every gaze snapped toward me. Mr. and Mrs. Liu studied me like a background character. Madame Wenfang and my father tensed, waiting for me to ruin the scene the way I had before. I stepped out of the shadows slowly, as if I were crossing from one life into another. My eyes skimmed the ring, Selina's triumphant smile, my parents' greed. Then, through the window, the rain. "It's beautiful," I said. My voice was calm, flat, almost kind. "It suits you." Relief loosened the room. Selina's smirk sharpened. Mr. and Mrs. Liu seemed satisfied that the older sister knew her place. No one asked about the scar on my arm. No one asked who came home that night, soaked, shaking, blooded. They didn't want truth. They wanted a saviour who looked right in white, so I gave them what they wanted. I curved my lips, just enough to be mistaken for acceptance, and offered my stepsister the blessing that would become her curse. "Congratulations, Selina," I said softly. "You and Mr. Liu are truly a match made in heaven." And in my heart, I added the rest. Enjoy your perfect ending while it lasts, because one day Damien Liu will look at his life, at his saviour, at the lie he married, and he will finally understand what he drowned with his own hands. And when that day comes, I'll be there, smiling, watching the happy couple try to laugh to the very end. That afternoon, Madame Wenfang dragged Selina Su through the most upscale mall in the city as if she were parading a winning lottery ticket through a cathedral of glass and gold. When they came back, they brought the scent of luxury with them, new leather, crisp tissue paper, expensive perfume that clung to the air and tried to overwrite the old apartment's stale memories. Shopping bags covered the sofa. Some were so large they looked like they belonged to a different home. Selina, in a rare burst of kindness, approached me with a paper bag held delicately between two fingers like she was offering alms. "Iris," she said sweetly, "this is for you." Inside was a scarf from an affordable luxury brand, the price tag still attached, expensive enough to feel like a statement, but not nearly expensive enough to be mistaken for equality. It was charity dressed as sisterhood. I didn't even look at the pattern. I took it, placed it on the side table, and let it sit there like a forgotten prop. "Thank you," I said calmly, "but I don't really have a use for it." Selina's lips puckered into a pout, offended, as if I had rejected love instead of a thinly veiled insult. She turned away and immediately returned to what mattered to her, discussing which dress would impress the Lu family during their next visit. Madame Wenfang leaned in with shining eyes, flipping through options as if each gown was a rung on the ladder she'd been trying to climb her entire life. My father, Su Jian, started taking calls with a confidence he'd never had before. His struggling little business suddenly had opportunities. His voice grew louder, his laughter more generous, as if being the future father-in-law of the Lu heir had somehow turned him into a man worth respecting. The apartment became a marketplace of greed and laughter, and I became what I had always been in that home, a transparent ghost slipping between my room and the kitchen, unnoticed, untouched, and strangely at peace. Because while they were drunk on borrowed glory, my life was finally moving forward on my own terms. I met with the head of an independent studio 2 days later. The conversation went smoothly. Too smoothly, like I'd stepped into a version of myself I'd been denied for years. They liked the cool restraint of my designs. They said my lines were clean, but there was something stubborn and resilient underneath, like a blade hidden in silk. The pay wasn't breathtaking, but it was enough. Enough to move out, enough to breathe. So I spent my nights drawing, refining, building my own future with sharp pencils and quieter dreams. The scar on my arm faded into a faint pink mark, the kind people would overlook unless they were looking for it. A few days later, the Lu family sent a car. A black luxury sedan rolled into our residential area like a predator dressed in elegance. Madame Wenfang and my father treated it like a royal carriage. They surrounded Selina, adjusting her hair, smoothing her skirt, layering her with instructions. "Be obedient," Madame Wenfang murmured. "Mrs. Lu likes gentle girls." "If Damien wakes up," my father added, "talk to him more. Make him feel safe." Selina nodded with obedient excitement, and when she slid into the car, she looked like she was stepping into the life she believed she deserved. The car sped off, leaving a thin trail of dust. I stood by the window and watched it disappear, a faint smile tugging at my mouth. Damien should already be awake by now. In my last life, he regained consciousness on the 5th day after the accident. The first thing he did was ask about the girl who had saved him. Selina was brought before him, eyes red, voice trembling, repeating a rehearsed rescue story filled with vague details and thick emotional varnish. Back then, Damien had been weak and exhausted, his mind fogged by pain and gratitude, his parents' certainty sealing the lie like wax. So he believed her, he thanked her, he protected her, he made her his light. And me, the one who had knelt in rain, shouted, "Stay with me!" into his ear, pried open the jammed lock with shaking hands, and turned my palms into raw wounds for his breathing. I was erased, not just forgotten, rewritten into a villain later. The irony never stopped tasting like blood. That evening, Selina returned. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes bright, her whole body vibrating with the kind of excitement that comes from finally stepping onto a stage that has been set for you. She burst through the door and threw herself into Madame Wenfang's arms. "Mom! Dad! Damien is awake. He spoke to me today." Madame Wenfang and my father swarmed her like hungry people around a feast. "How is he?" Does he look okay? Did Mrs. Lu like you today? What did he say? Tell us, tell us. Selina sat on the sofa like a proud peacock, then began describing everything in vivid, sparkling detail. He's still a little pale, she said, eyes dreamy, but he's so handsome, even more handsome than in the magazines. She paused, then blushed at exactly the right time. He thanked me. He said I've worked hard. Madame Wenfang actually clapped, delighted like a child. Oh, that's wonderful! Selina lowered her voice as if she was sharing a secret. And he said, once he feels a bit better, he'll personally take me to pick out a wedding dress. My father nodded so hard it looked like his neck might snap. I knew it, he said, beaming. Our Selina is blessed. I watched them. 3 people orbiting around a lie, smiling so brightly you'd think they'd invented happiness. Selina finally turned toward me, her gaze dripping with condescending pity. Sis, she said, as if I were a small, unfortunate pet. What did you do at home today? It must be boring here, she sighed dramatically. When Damien and I are stable, I'll introduce you to a friend. Maybe you can marry someone reliable. I cut her off without raising my voice. No need. I picked up the water glass on the table, took a sip, and said calmly, I've taken on design work lately. I'm busy. Design work? Selina sneered, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. How much money can your little hobby make? You should focus on finding someone to marry, not drawing pretty pictures. Madame Wenfang chimed in instantly, eager to keep me in my assigned place. Exactly, Iris. Don't waste time on flashy things. A girl should think about her future. I set the glass down. The bass tapped the table with a crisp sound, and that small noise silenced them more effectively than any argument. I lifted my eyes and looked at Selina, expression unreadable. My little sister should worry more about her own marriage, I said softly. A life-saving debt is a very heavy thing. Selina's face changed. A flicker of panic flashed in her eyes before anger rushed in to cover it. What do you mean by that? I mean exactly what I said. I stood up, no longer interested in feeding their need for drama. I'm tired. I'm going to rest. Behind me, Selina's voice rose, sharp with wounded pride. Mum, look at her. She's jealous. Madame Wenfang comforted her. My father scolded me. Their voices pressed against my closed door like dirty hands. I leaned back against the wood and listened to my own heartbeat, steady, calm, almost amused. Jealous? No. I was waiting for the first crack, waiting for the day Damien Lu's gratitude, built like a temple on sand, finally collapsed under the weight of one simple question Selina could never answer correctly. And when the lie breaks, it won't break quietly. It will shatter, and I'll be there, still calm, still invisible, watching their stolen fairy tale burn from the inside out. Lu Rowan stepped into the warehouse-turned-gallery, like a man walking into a room that had already been judging him for years. He wore a dark suit cut with the kind of precision money could buy, a cashmere coat draped over his shoulders as if cold weather had no right to touch him. His complexion still held a faint pallor from blood loss, but his spine was straight, and the sharpness between his brows carried that familiar blend of tech elite arrogance and something darker, something left behind by illness, by near death, by the fact that the world had almost taken him and failed. On his arm was Selina Sue. She was dressed in full regalia, diamonds catching the cold white lights as if she had personally hired them to flatter her. Her smile bloomed bright and perfect, like a flower forced open in winter. The moment she saw me, that smile froze for half a beat, just long enough for panic to flicker under the surface. Then she tightened her grip around Rowan's arm, fingers pressing into his sleeve like a claim, a declaration. Mine, Jade, my manager, had already stepped forward. Her smile warm but controlled, the way professionals greeted power without kneeling to it. Mr. Lu, she said smoothly, What an unexpected honour. Rowan's gaze swept the exhibition hall with that habitual scrutiny he wore like a second skin. It wasn't the casual curiosity of a guest. It was the assessment of someone who measured everything and everyone in value, risk, and payoff. Then his eyes landed on the main display board, and then on me. They paused. His expression shifted in a way so small most people wouldn't catch it. Unfamiliarity first, then curiosity, then something faint like a pebble of doubt sinking into water. Selina followed his line of sight, and that sweet smile snapped back into place like a mask. "Oh, sis!" Her voice lifted in a bright, fake surprise as she pulled Rowan toward me. "What a coincidence! Why are you here?" Her tone made it sound like I was a stain that shouldn't exist on expensive fabric. I didn't flinch. "I work here," Selina blinked, pretending innocence. "Work? Here?" She tilted her head. "Do you mean as a part-time waitress?" The insult was wrapped in sugar, but it was still an insult. "If you're short on money," she continued, voice dripping with false concern, "you can tell the family. Why exhaust yourself like this?" "Selina," Rowan interrupted softly. Not sharp, not angry, just a single word, spoken with the kind of quiet authority that stopped noise without trying. But his eyes didn't leave me. They studied my face as if it were a code he couldn't quite crack. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone polite. But the question was real. Selina's nails pressed harder into his sleeve before she smiled again. "She's my sister," she said quickly. "Iris Sue." Rowan nodded once. Perfect manners, perfect distance. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Sue." "Mr. Liu," I replied with the same distance. For a few seconds, his gaze lingered, searching, as if some part of him expected recognition to rise up and meet him halfway, as if memory were a door he kept, touching, wondering why it wouldn't open. He found nothing, so he turned, attention caught by the display board behind me. "These designs," he said, "are distinctive." "Thank you." Selina didn't like that. I saw it in the way her smile tightened, in the way her eyes flicked between Rowan and the sketches, as if jealousy were an itch under her skin. "Rowan," she said, voice sweet but impatient. "This style is too sharp. It's uncomfortable to look at. Let's go to the other side. My friend is waiting." She tugged gently, trying to pull him away. Rowan didn't move. His eyes had fixed on a detail image pinned to the corner of the board, a sketch of thorn elements wrapped around a wrist guard. Beside it, a short line of concept text in clean, steady handwriting. "Flowers bloom from broken places. Scars are medals." His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. Then his gaze returned to me, sharper now, curiosity no longer polite. "Are you the designer?" he asked. "Yes." A pause, a beat long enough for the air to change. Then, unexpectedly, Rowan asked, "Do you believe in karma?" The words were quiet, but they landed like a stone thrown into a still pond. Ripples spread across the room. Invisible, but real. Cause and effect. Debt and repayment. In my last life, I had died for his belief. In this life, I would live to watch that belief turn against the person who stole it. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch just enough to make Selina uncomfortable. Then I lifted my eyes and met Rowan's probing gaze. "I do," I said calmly. "I've always believed karma is a cycle." Selina's smile twitched. I continued, my voice even, almost gentle. "Retribution never fails. It's not that it hasn't come, it's that the time hasn't arrived." Rowan's eyes darkened, as if something inside him shifted into place. Selina's face lost a shade of colour. Her fingers tightened around his arm so hard it looked painful. Not far away, Adrian Gu, standing with his glass of water, his expression unreadable, lifted the cup to his lips. The smallest curve touched the corner of his mouth, hidden behind the rim. He'd seen the whole thing. The lights remained cold and white, bright enough to expose every subtle crack in Selena's performance. And for the first time since the storm, Rowan looked like a man who had begun to suspect he'd been worshipping the wrong light. The preview ended, the crowd spilled into polite conversations, and the air shifted, thin, tense like fabric stretched too tight. When I returned home that night, the atmosphere was delicate, in a way that almost made me smile. Selena's insecurity had sharpened. She stopped flaunting jewellery like trophies and started flaunting intimacy like armour. "Rowan likes me best in champagne," she announced at breakfast, watching my face for a reaction. "It makes me look gentle. Yesterday, he held my hand the entire meeting," she added later, voice bright, eyes restless. "Aunt Celeste said after the wedding she'll put the Nanwin Villa under my name." I listened like someone listening to weather reports. Occasionally I hummed or nodded while my eyes stayed on the drafts in my hands. The Dawn collection was moving into production. Jade was already talking next quarter collaborations. My life was finally built on something real. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. Madame Wenfang ordered the cleaning lady to do a deep clean, focusing on the storage cabinet in the living room. "Do you still want all these messy old things?" she shouted. "Iris, come look, is this bag yours?" I stepped out and saw her holding a battered canvas backpack stained with dried mud, edges torn slightly. My bag from that stormy night. My heart gave a sudden, uneven thump. I walked over and took it from her without changing my expression. "It's mine," I said. "I forgot to deal with it." "Throw it out," Madame Wenfang muttered. "It's taking up space. Who knows which dump you picked it up from?" She turned away, already rummaging for the next item to judge. I stood there with the bag in my hands, light and yet heavy enough to pull old memories back into my chest. I had already disposed of the blood-stained clothes and torn gloves after my rebirth. I didn't need them. Evidence had only ever been turned against me, but my fingers brushed an inconspicuous hidden pocket on the outside, the one I used to keep small emergency items, and I touched something hard and square, a memory card. My breath caught. The disposable waterproof camera. I had used it earlier that day to photograph decaying buildings for a project. Then the crash happened. The camera was lost in chaos, cleared away like trash. I'd forgotten, but the memory card was here. Somehow, my fingers tightened around it until my nails bit my palm. I went back into my room, locked the door, dug out an old card reader, and plugged it into my laptop. The first folder held dozens of architectural photos, ruined concrete, broken glass, sharp compositions that still felt like my eye and my taste. I scrolled fast, then the screen changed, dark, shaky, blurry, full of noise, a stormy night, twisted metal, shattered glass, rain pouring like the sky was bleeding, then a smear of dark red. My pulse slammed. In one dim, chaotic photo, a slender figure leaned into the crushed driver's side, arm taut with effort. The sleeve was rolled above the elbow, and on the forearm, even in the poor lighting, a dark mark stood out like a brand. Behind that figure, in the curtain of rain, a person in a light-coloured dress crouched, covering her face with both hands. Another photo. A hand gripping a steel bar, prying at something with brutal force, knuckles white. The fabric wrapped around the fingertips torn through, soaked in mud and dark stains. The composition was accidental. The quality was terrible. But it was enough, because lies don't need perfect clarity to die. They only need one sharp edge. I yanked out the reader and leaned back in my chair, lungs burning, cold sweat crawling down my spine. So the evidence had been here all along, quietly recording a fragment of that night. In my previous life, I would have thrown it like a grenade and watched it explode in my own hands. But now I understood timing. I backed up the photos to multiple encrypted cloud storages, I hid the physical card. I hid the reader. I closed the folder like a secret smile. Not yet. Let Selina enjoy her stolen glory a little longer. Let Rowan's suspicion ferment until it rises to the surface, undeniable, until the engagement banquet, until the lie reaches its highest peak and becomes too big to hide behind. 3 days before the banquet, the Liu family sent the invitations. Gilded covers, embossed names, elegance heavy enough to feel like a warning. Madame Wen Fang handed mine over like an order. "Wen? You go," she said. "Stay close. Speak as little as possible. Don't embarrass Selina." I accepted it and set it down without looking. That night, Adrian Gu called. "Will you attend the engagement banquet?" he asked, voice low. "The invitation arrived," I said. "So I suppose I will." A pause. "Rowan asked me about post-traumatic memory distortion," Adrian said. "He thinks fragments of that night may be incomplete. Or wrong." I could almost picture Rowan frowning, trying to stitch truth out of pain and instinct. "Let him keep investigating," I said softly. "Who knows? There might be a surprise." Another pause. Longer. Then Adrian said, "See you at the banquet." When the call ended, I opened my encrypted folder. Those blurry photos waited like sleeping knives. I copied one onto a new, unregistered USB drive, the one that showed the wounded hand prying at metal and the crouched figure in the background. It didn't show my face. It didn't need to. Then I registered an anonymous email through an overseas proxy. I turned off the computer. The key would be turned at the right lock. The day before the banquet, Selina tried on her gown for the final time. Paris couture, diamonds stitched like captured starlight. She stood before the mirror as Madame Wen Fang and my father praised her into a dream. "Tomorrow you'll be the most dazzling star." Selina turned, gaze sliding toward me where I sat with a magazine, and smiled like someone sharpening a blade. "Sis," she said sweetly, "watch closely tomorrow. See what real happiness looks like." I closed the magazine and met her eyes in the mirror. One of us glittered like a queen about to be crowned. The other looked plain, quiet, almost invisible, but only one of us wasn't dancing on the edge of a cliff. "I will," I said, my smile faint, precise. "I'll watch very carefully." And in my mind, I finished the sentence she didn't hear. "I'll watch your dream rise, and then watch it fall." On the day of the engagement banquet, the weather was cruelly perfect. The lakeside garden looked like a white dream. Flowers, gauze curtains, crystal chandeliers catching sunlight like shards of ice. Media lined the carpet, cameras hungry. Selina arrived radiant, arm linked with Rowan. He smiled for the photos, but the warmth never reached his eyes. I followed behind, dressed in simple black, an insignificant shadow among diamonds. The ceremony began. The host dramatized the car accident, painted Selina as brave, selfless, legendary. Guests sighed, applauded, admired. Selina pressed close to Rowan, tears glittering on cue. Rowan's knuckles whitened around his glass. Then came the ring exchange. The hall lights dimmed. The huge screen which had been showing sweet photos of the couple flickered. The image vanished, replaced by a blurry, noise-filled picture. Twisted metal, shattered glass. Rain. A wounded hand caked with mud, gripping rebar, prying at something with desperate force. In the background, someone in a light-coloured dress crouched, face hidden, small and terrified. A hush fell over the room like a curtain, and for the first time Selina's smile didn't just crack, it broke. Beneath the photo, a single line of white text appeared, clean, simple, merciless. "Who is saving lives, and who is just watching?" It read like a cold footnote carved into stone. For a heartbeat, the entire banquet hall stopped breathing. No clinking glasses, no polite laughter, no rustle of silk. Even the music seemed to choke and die in the air. hundreds of eyes locked onto that blurry frame on the screen, as if staring hard enough could force it to change back into the fairy tale they had paid to attend. Selena's face drained so fast it looked like someone had pulled the blood straight out of her skin. Her pupils tightened to pinpoints. Terror pinned her spine upright, locked her joints, froze her breath. Madame Wenfang and my father stood behind her like two puppets whose strings had been cut, mouths hanging open, eyes blank with the shock of sudden ruin. Rowan's head snapped toward the screen. Then, fast, violent, he turned to Selena. The calm mask he had worn all evening shattered. What replaced it was raw fury and disbelief, the kind that comes from realizing you've been made a public fool. "No," he rasped, voice tight. "No, this isn't real." Selena jolted as if his words were a slap. She lunged for his arm, voice breaking into a sharp, trembling cry. "Rowan, listen to me! This is fake! Someone is setting me up!" Rowan shook her off, not gently, not politely. His force sent her stumbling, heels skidding, almost falling in front of everyone. For a second, the diamonds on her dress didn't look like luxury anymore. They looked like weights. Rowan's eyes were winter, cold, merciless, cutting. "Explain," he said through clenched teeth. "Selena, tell me whose hand that is." He pointed at the screen, at the battered hand gripping rebar, straining with desperate strength. That hand was not Selena's. Selena's hands were a product, smooth, pale, flawless. The hands of someone who'd never pried metal in a storm, never felt glass-sliced skin, never tasted rain mixed with blood. It's... Selena's voice collapsed into incoherence. Her terror was too big for language. Instinct took over, and she turned, desperate, hunting for someone else to drag down with her. Her eyes found me. In an instant, the room's gaze followed hers like a tide shifting direction. I sat in the far corner, one leg crossed over the other, a half-finished glass of juice resting in my hand. My face was blank, calm, almost bored, as if none of this had anything to do with me. Only Adrian Gu, standing nearest, caught the smallest detail, the fleeting curve at the corner of my lips, cold and sharp as a blade glimpsed under cloth. It vanished the moment I lowered my lashes. Then the lights snapped back on. The screen flickered, the photo disappeared, gone, as if it had never existed, but the room had changed. The silence left behind wasn't empty, it was heavy, rotten, full of fear. Selena's pallor, Rowan's livid expression, the guests' frozen faces and tight whispers. Everything screamed the same truth. This engagement banquet, this magnificent dream built on lies, was over. And the fall had begun. A suffocating silence held for 2 seconds. Then the hall erupted. A buzzing murmur surged like a tidal wave, sharp and hungry. People leaned forward, whispering behind hands, eyes darting between Selena, shaking, mascara streaking, Rowan, rigid with wrath, and me, still motionless in the corner. What was that? That hand isn't hers. The one in the background, was that Selena? Oh my God! Is the lifesaver fake? The Liu family is humiliated. Rowan Liu got played. The words drilled into Selena's ears like needles. Her body trembled violently, like a leaf caught in a storm. She clawed toward Rowan again, voice shattered into sobs. "Rowan, it's not like that. Listen to me. It was my sister. It must be Iris. She's jealous. She fabricated those photos. She hates me." Rowan flung her off again. This time, Selena fell hard, landing on the cold floor with a sound that made the nearest guests flinch. Her diamond-studded gown sprawled around her like a gaudy flower abruptly ripped from its stem. Rowan looked down at her with something worse than anger, disgust. Iris fabricated it. Rowan's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying pressure that sliced through the chaos. Even now, Selina, you're still lying. He didn't look at her again. He turned his head slowly, and his gaze landed on me. That look was a storm all on its own. Shock, scrutiny, wrath, and something faintly unstable under it, like a truth he didn't want creeping up his throat. Iris, Sue, he said my name as if it hurt his teeth. Every eye in the room swung back to me. I set my juice glass down with deliberate calm. The bass clicked lightly against the table, a tiny sound that somehow felt louder than the host's microphone. Then I stood. The simple black dress I wore looked almost severe under the dazzling chandeliers, like I had never meant to sparkle, only to endure. I met Rowan's gaze without flinching. No fear, no triumph, just an unfathomable stillness. "Mr. Liu?" I said, polite as a stranger. Rowan's jaw tightened. His stare tried to tear something out of me. Guilt, confession, panic, anything. "That photograph," he said. "Was it your doing?" "I don't understand what you mean," I replied evenly. "I'm just a guest who happened to witness an interesting scene." From the floor, Selina screamed, voice jagged with hysteria. "She's lying! It was her! She resents me! She set me up! Rowan, don't believe her!" Madame Wen Fang, and my father finally stumbled back into motion. Madame Wen Fang rushed towards Selina, but Rowan's glare pinned her in place like a nail through flesh. My father tried to step forward, face paper white, voice shaking with forced reason. "Mr. Liu, this must be a misunderstanding. Someone sabotaged the screen. Selina would never—" "Shut up!" Rowan's voice cracked like a whip. His gaze swept over my so-called family with lethal contempt, then settled back on me. "You know the truth," he said. "Not a question, a verdict." I looked at him, the man who had condemned me in my last life, who had called me a thief while drowning the actual saviour. Now he stood under chandeliers and cameras, anger and doubt warring in his eyes. For one sharp second, revenge buzzed through me like electricity. Then it cooled into something darker. "The truth," I repeated softly, and the smallest curve touched my lips, almost kind, almost cruel. "Mr. Liu, the light you believe in may not be as brave as you imagined." The words landed like an invisible slap. Rowan's face tightened and his eyes went frighteningly dark. Selina let out a piercing scream. Then her eyes rolled back. She fainted on the spot, collapsing into Madame Wen Fang's arms like a puppet finally abandoned by its strings. The Liu parents surged forward, pale and rigid, trying to contain the scene, ushering guests back, ordering staff, calling security, forcing control over a scandal that had already escaped. The perfect banquet became a public execution. I let the crowd sweep around me. As I moved toward the exit, I passed Adrian Gu. He spoke without turning his head, voice low. "Quite a commotion." "Just the beginning," I murmured, and kept walking. Outside, the evening air hit my face cold and clean. Behind me, the banquet hall roared with chaos. Ahead, the city lights waited, bright, indifferent, mine. I took out my phone and erased the anonymous account, cleared every trace. Then I called the moving company. "Tomorrow morning at 8, I said. "Be on time." When I hung up, I breathed in the cold air, letting it fill my lungs like freedom. Selina's social death had begun. Rowan's trust had cracked, and this time, I wasn't staying to drown with them. I was walking away. Or were you simply refusing to remember, because you had already gotten used to Selina's gentle devotion, gotten used to calling her your light, because somewhere deep down, you knew that if the truth broke through, it wouldn't just shatter her, it would shatter you, your pride, your judgment, your so-called gratitude, the entire illusion you'd wrapped around that stormy night. Rowan's face tightened as if I'd pressed a blade into the softest part of him. "Shut up!" The words came out hoarse, violent, almost desperate. He lifted his hand like he meant to grab my shoulders, to shake the calm off me, to force me to say something, anything, that would let him keep hating me instead of hating himself. But his hand froze in midair, then it curled into a fist so tight the knuckles cracked. Rain slid off his hair in thin streams, darkening the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. The man standing in my doorway no longer looked like a tech king. He looked like a beast lost in a downpour, pride shattered, rage caged, eyes burning with humiliation and panic at being seen too clearly. "Iris!" He tried again, voice trembling with fury. "You—" He couldn't finish, because any accusation would collapse under its own weight, because every word he wanted to throw at me belonged to the lie he'd protected. Watching him like this, my heart didn't bloom with satisfaction. It went cold. So this was all it took to break him. And what was this compared to the sea, compared to the icy water swallowing my lungs? Compared to the moment I realized the man I had saved had decided I deserved to die. "Mr. Liu," I said, voice flat, "if there's nothing else, leave." I took a step back and reached for the door. "You are not welcome here." His gaze snapped up, shock slicing through the anger, as if he couldn't comprehend the concept that someone could shut him out. I shut the door anyway, firm, clean, final. The cold rain and his ruin stayed outside. Leaning against the door, I listened to his breathing, heavy, suppressed, like an animal trying not to howl. Then, finally, the sound of staggered footsteps retreating down the hallway. Only when the echo faded did my knees give. I slid down to the floor, hugging my legs to my chest. No triumph. No fireworks of revenge, just a deep, bone-heavy weariness, a hollow emptiness that tasted like rainwater and old grief. I had torn off his last fig leaf. I had forced him to look at the crack in his own reflection. Now what? Would he keep lying to himself? Clinging to pride and a love that had become a public joke? Or would he go feral, pouring every ounce of rage into the woman who had turned him into a fool? I didn't know, but I was curious, and I was done caring. The apartment returned to quiet. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft, persistent, tapping against the window like a slow drumbeat. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dimness until my limbs stiffened, until the edges of the room blurred into shadow. My phone screen lit up now and then, messages from Jade about production schedules, fabric approvals, shipment dates, practical things, real things, a world that didn't orbit Rowan Liu's collapse. I made hot tea and stood by the window, palms wrapped around the cup's warmth. The street below was empty, no trace of him, only wet pavement reflecting streetlights like a thin, sorrowful river. I had ended our conversation, but the storm I'd started was ripping through everyone caught in the centre. Over the next few days, the fragments arrived in pieces, stitched together by gossip, whispers, and the occasional blunt message from Adrian. Selina had broken, not metaphorically. The Liu family had demanded she leave the residence they'd arranged for her. She was pushed into a hotel like discarded luggage. Madame Wen Fang and my father hovered uselessly at her side. Sometimes Selina screamed and cried until her throat went raw, cursing me, cursing Rowan, cursing the world. Other times she went frighteningly still, eyes vacant, refusing food and water like someone who had already left her body. Paparazzi caught her once. She looked unrecognizable, hair messy, face swollen, clothes plain, the former future Mrs. Liu reduced to a trembling figure shielding her face from cameras. Those friends who'd once orbit around her shine vanished overnight. Some even rushed forward to declare they'd always suspected her. Social death had a smell. It was sour, metallic, like the rot underneath perfume. Rowan's destruction was different. He didn't come back. but Adrian sent updates in clipped, clinical lines that somehow felt colder than any insult. Rowan was pulling dashcam footage from every possible source, hunting traffic police records, interviewing paramedics, requesting hospital logs. He locked himself in his office and refused visitors. His mind was a machine grinding itself into sparks, frantic to find proof that would either clear Selina or condemn me, anything that would let him escape the most unbearable possibility. That he had been wrong from the very beginning. His pride couldn't digest that, and the Lou Group was paying for it. Stock fluctuations were the visible surface. The deeper damage was partner confidence shaking, competitors circling, opportunists biting. The Lou parents were drowning in crisis management, stabilizing the company with one hand, while trying to restrain their son's volatility with the other. Rumour said Rowan had openly clashed with a senior board member, nearly blowing up the relationship in a meeting. He was no longer the calm prodigy. He was a dangerous wildcard driven by fury and failure. It was exactly what lies did. They were loans with brutal interest, easy to take, ruinous to repay. Selina had overdrafted on glory and love that weren't hers. Now she was repaying it with reputation, sanity, and future. Rowan had overdrafted on blind faith and obsessive protection. Now he was paying with reason and pride. And me, I was simply the one who had seen the truth first and nudged the first domino. One evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered out of boredom. Madame Wenfang's voice exploded into my ear, tearful, nasal, venomous. "Iris Sue, you curse! You ungrateful wretch! Are you trying to drive your sister to death? Look what you've done! Are you satisfied now?" I walked to the window and watched the city lights. My voice stayed calm. She chose to steal someone else's credit. She chose to lie. She chose this path. Madame Wenfang shrieked. "If you weren't jealous, if you didn't bring out those damn photos, none of this would have happened. You just can't stand seeing her do well." I laughed softly, the sound thin and cold. "Ask your precious daughter," I said. "When she climbed by stepping on my flesh, did she ever think about letting me live?" Silence on the other end, only ragged breathing. I continued, voice turning to ice. "Stop calling me! I'm tired of your family's drama." I hung up, blocked the number, set the phone face down. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow, I had drafts to finish. My life would no longer be tangled in their rot. Let them tear each other apart in the mud. For me, it was just distant noise, background static to a future I'd finally earned. "Thank you, Dr. Gu, you're too kind." I invited Adrian inside and offered him a seat. My studio wasn't large, but it breathed with intention. Mood boards from Breaking the Cocoon lined one wall. Fabric swatches hung like quiet flags of war and rebirth. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, scattering dappled shadows across the floor like moving water. Adrian's gaze travelled the room, then paused on me. "You look well." "I am," I said, pouring him a glass of water. "Doing what I love brings peace. It keeps the noise out." He nodded, fell silent, then spoke as if it were casual conversation, like he wasn't about to drop a stone into still water. "Selina's condition has been fluctuating. She needs long-term hospitalization. Her parents sold most of what they had to cover it. They moved away, rarely come back." I listened without reacting. That ending had been written the moment she chose someone else's blood as her ladder. Madness was simply the last shelter left when guilt met reality and couldn't survive. Adrian's voice lowered. "Lou Corporation had a major financial crisis last quarter. Several aggressive projects collapsed. The funding chain broke. Insolvency. The board removed Rowan." My hand paused on the glass for a fraction of a second. It happened faster, cleaner than I expected. Adrian's eyes held something complicated. After he was forced out, his mental state deteriorated. Last month he drove under the influence, crossed Sea Bridge. He hit the guardrail and went into the water. The room grew so quiet, I could hear the wind brushing the trees outside. They pulled him out, Adrian said, but the injuries were severe, spinal nerves damaged, permanent paralysis. I set the glass down. The crisp sound against the table felt like punctuation. In my last life, he sent me into the sea. In this life, the sea took him back, without my hands on the wheel. Adrian continued softly. He called me once before the accident, said he'd figured out everything about that night. Said he owed you an apology. I turned toward the window and watched young designers crossing the park, bright and busy under the sun. Too late, I said, not out of bitterness, out of truth. An apology could never warm the bone-chilling water of that other life. It could never unbreak what had been broken. But it also didn't matter anymore, because my life had already turned the page. When Adrian left, I returned to my workbench and traced a clean line across a new draft, smooth, certain, forward. That evening, as I walked home under a sky painted orange-red, a giant street screen played financial news. Lou Group enters bankruptcy liquidation. No one stopped to watch. An era ended quietly. I lifted my eyes to the last streak of twilight and felt only calm. The debts were paid. The cycle closed.